Hello and welcome to Zero Trust in an Encrypted World. Today's webinar is sponsored by Gigamon and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you have. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we are offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a white paper on zero trust and the importance of network visibility written by John Kindervag, who's the creator of Zero Trust. Then there's an analyst report by Kindervag about how deep observability is the foundation of zero trust. And there are PDFs about Gigamon's implementation at the DoD, another one about network visibility, and another case study involving both defense and intelligence agencies. So a lot of great resources in there. Highly recommend you grab those. Now, also in there, you can find some of the actual tech media resources. There's the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to ATM's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Stephen Goodrow, who's Cloud Security Evangelist at Gigamon. So, Stephen, take it away.
Zero trust, the paradox of encryption in a zero trust world. And then, of course, what do you do with the information once you've decrypted it? So my name is Stephen Goodrow. I have almost 30 years in IT. Started out as a network engineer. Spent 11 years at Tipping Point at Trend Micro, where I did a 1-year tour of duty in DV Labs. Did a lot of deep packet inspection, network performance testing, and I really enjoy network level evasions. I know that makes me weird, but so we're going to discuss zero trust in this presentation, and we're going to take a slightly different approach to it. And it's not just here to pitch you a particular solution. We're going to talk about it holistically and maybe some things you can use in your zero trust journey, because it's going to be a journey. So first, let's talk about the problem we're trying to solve, and that is the internet was never designed to run securely. It was designed to survive a nuclear war. And resiliency was how it was built, if you look into the original ARPANET specs. So zero trust is not going to be a product or a project or a quick fix issue. It's going to be a journey similar to the journey to the cloud. So what we're going to cover at a glance, we're going to cover a bit of tactical and strategic. We're going to compare two of the biggest zero trust models, the CISA model and the Department of Defense model, both U.S. government models. We're going to understand or try to look at some of the challenges in creating a zero trust plan, because you're going to need to have a plan. You can't just have a project, slap zero trust on it, and then assume you're a little bit further down the road, because without a plan, you could be spending resources inefficiently. We're going to look into the encryption paradox, because everything has to be encrypted, yet everything has to be inspected. So that's a bit of a challenge, right? We've got two mandates that diametrically oppose each other. Then we're going to look at what to do with the decrypted traffic, because decrypting it isn't a panacea. It's not a solution, right? You still have to do something. Then we're going to pivot into some zero trust use cases. This is going to be a bit tactical. So I kind of want to cover conceptually from the problem we're trying to solve to the plan we need to solve it to some maybe some hands-on things that could be done to solve it. So also, we're not going to be covering every possible thing in zero trust, right? That's just too much to cover. So let's cover some of the two major zero trust models. So we have the Department of Defense model, which has over 152 plus controls. They're very tactical in nature. It's a great place to start as an actionable list of controls. The Department of Defense has a deadline and a budget, and all branches of the U.S. Department of Defense are pursuing it. We have the civilian agency, CISA. Their reference architecture is here. It's similar yet different. It's not as detailed. This is probably where most civilian organizations are going to start. I've also seen that some other national agencies from other governments are borrowing heavily from the CISA model. And this is probably the path the private sector is going to take, or a hybrid between the two models. So the CISA model has these five pillars of identity, devices, networks, applications, workloads, and data. And then there's the underlying pillars of governance, orchestration, and visibility. Now we're going to cover the network portion and the visibility and analytics portion, but that by no means is an entirely comprehensive model, right? Now, I really, really like this Department of Defense fan chart. And one of the reasons is you start at the upper left. And as you see, it's broken out into users, devices, data, and so on. And the further right you get, the more advanced the controls are. Now, what I've done is I have mapped Gigamon's solutions to this model. Now, if you're struggling with where to start, I would suggest taking this model, reading through each and every entry, figuring out what's applicable to your enterprise and coloring it in, right? Then, when you have a vendor come to you saying, oh, we solve for X or Y, have them color in the appropriate areas you need. And then you have a great visual compare contrast that you can build off of. Also, there's some very technically explicit things within these controls. If you look them up, they should be publicly available, saying what you should be shooting for. And I really want to stress that you need a plan. And without a plan, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Uh, building your own zero trust framework. You should probably choose a hybrid of these two plans. Um, create a coherent zero trust project. So what I've been seeing is a lot of people say, "Oh, we've been needing to upgrade our firewalls for forever now. If I put zero trust in front of it, it'll probably move us down the road a little bit, but it needs to be put into that plan so you know when you should execute on something and how far it'll take you down. Otherwise, every IT project is going to put zero trust in front of it with an idea that will help somehow, even if it's not necessarily adhering to the plan. And then we're also going to have to manage up a little bit with the understanding that zero trust isn't a one and done. You're not going to go buy something from someone. No one person or one vendor can solve for zero trust. Now, they may solve for a cluster of components, as we saw in that fan chart, and that's perfectly reasonable. And if you map that out to your plan, maybe that's exactly what you need. But there's going to be so much more. And much like the cloud, this is going to be a journey. It's not going to be a one and done. So let's dive in a little bit to the encryption and decryption paradox, because we've got diametrically opposed mandates. So the first thing we want to do is look at the NSA guidelines for decryption. The first thing they say, well, not the first thing, but it's in the document, is do it well and do it once. And I want to pivot a little bit to a tactical discussion on how this decryption is done, because how it's done and where it sits is hugely important. You have two primary methods of decryption. The first one is break and inspect. And that's where you have the private keys of whatever you're monitoring, and you can look at what's going on and monitor the traffic that way. Now, it's important to know you planned this out. This is a happy path approach. The other one is proxy forward, where you have a client or a workload somewhere deep within the network. It wants to connect to, say, CNN. So what'll happen is it will initiate a connection. It will end up on the decrypt device or service. The decrypt device or service in question will then create another connection, another encrypted connection out to that news website, and then it will sit in the middle and inspect all the information. Now, that has challenges as well, and that is typically an outbound scenario. Now, what's not being covered is everything else, right? Any kind of internal, any kind of machine to machine connection is not being inspected. So, what are some possible solutions? Well, we have potentially selective decrypt. Um, I'm not trying to sell Gigamon per se, but we do sit broadly internally within the network. And we can selectively decrypt north, south, east, west. This would be similar to either probably having the private keys, and this is a quasi layer 2 device. So again, decryption comes with baggage, and it's not a answer to everything. So there's a good chance with a lot of lateral movement, this may or may not be detected. Now, what we can do in this particular scenario is we can grab the decrypted traffic and then duplicate it and send it to various inspection tools. Remember, we are not the inspection point. We can manage the traffic in many, many ways. So I want to introduce pre-encryption. And this is, I would say, a very cloud native or virtual native approach. And what pre-encryption is, it's the ability to see traffic in plain text before it hits the encryption library within a workload. So this is the first virtual decrypt solution in the industry that I'm aware of. And because we're able to capture and duplicate the traffic and mirror it out to various tools before it hits the encryption library, we don't break any of the encryption. So this works great with TLS 1.3. We don't need to know the keys. We don't need to know the cipher. And that is hugely important. Now, this is a very cloudy solution. And by that, I mean, you don't have a big stack of compute somewhere in the sky or in the cloud running this encryption. We push the compute workload down, or the compute work down to the workload. So this is a very cloud friendly, cloud native solution. So here's a more tactical description of how this works, right? So we have app one within a container or a VM. We have our Gigamon virtual tap that happens to be sitting on it, and it can grab the traffic either before it hits the encryption library or after it's done with the encryption library. And this can broadly be used in east-west or lateral visibility deployments. Now, this is not going to replace whatever decrypt stack you have. Probably not. But this does greatly enhance how far you can see. And you can now see into areas that before it wasn't really an option. And the other great part of this, there's no key management, right? So we've pushed this work down to the workload. Now, there is going to be, a performance hit. You don't always, you have to pay it all the time, right? Pay now or pay later, but you always pay. But it's distributed amongst the workloads. And as you can see on the left, we can hit all major public clouds and all major private clouds. With the private clouds, it's very, very easy just to add a bunch of compute to it. For the public clouds, compute is at a premium. So do keep that in mind. But it's still a solution you didn't have previous. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about compliance on decryption because this is always a huge problem, right? So some of the other methods of decryption, out of band decryption, right? This doesn't necessarily work for TLS 1.3. We've got a virtual inline decryption. This could be if you've deployed a virtual next-gen firewall in the public cloud. Um, it's not a natural construct in the public cloud, and of course, you're chewing up lots and lots of compute. You get the key sniffers, but that also has its problems. And then we have the option for pre-encryption. And again, this is huge because it works on containers and VMs, and it helps open up a whole new realm of lateral visibility. And no actual decryption is taking place, right? Because we capture it before it's encrypted. So now that the traffic's decrypted, now what? Now, I want to take a minute to talk about NIST SP 800-2070 trust architecture. And it specifically calls out um, network level visibility, sorry about that, as being very important to zero trust. It's not just EDR, it's not just any single source of truth. And the single source of truth is kind of important, and we're going to cover that in some real world use cases right now that are happening as we speak. So we have the telemetry triad, as we like to call it, right? We have agents, your EDR, everything that happens on the workload. You have logs of various things, network logs, traffic in motion, and then we have the packet data. And what we're going to show with some real world use cases is that these bottom two can be mutable. They can be changed. And again, we want to go back to the concept of no single point of truth. So I want to also talk about familiarity bias, and what this is we all have it, and we all think something works in a certain way, and that we also ignore things we're not very familiar with. So I want to talk a little bit about logging as part of the telemetry triad, and that's we don't actually know what's going on. Logging is being asked to solve for a problem it was never designed to solve for. And because we make a lot of assumptions based on our familiarity bias, because it's always worked this way, so why wouldn't it work this way in the future? We have a serious problem with the non-standard port use case. And we can see this in threat actor report after threat actor report. They're using non-standard ports to navigate east-west through the network. And I know it's super interesting to see like Shell Shock or Cobalt Strike, um, or WannaCry or Eternal Blue, but that's the tip of the spear. That's when the attack is launched. The threat actor has navigated the way through the entirety of the enterprise, found what they needed, and then launched the attack. And they're doing that through lateral movement and often through non-standard ports. So while it may be recorded logging, um, you have to make assumptions on what it is. So some of the things that we make assumptions on with when we look at standard logging suspicious network activity, we can't really see the ciphers, DNS tunnel exfiltration, or SSH tunnel exfiltration, or honestly, some threat actors just use Telnet on port 443, and that's going undetected, or it's being found way too late. You can also see rogue servers and applications. And of course, my favorite, the non-standard port use case, which is very, very difficult to solve for um, broadly within a network. So let's go over some zero trust use cases to help reinforce some of these ideas. And the first thing I want to talk about is DNS over TLS. So the NSA decryption document that I showed earlier does recommend running DNS over TLS. Now, there's two standards for this. One is you set up a 443 TLS connection, and then you do your DNS across it. The other is known as DOT, where it's a DNS over UDP, and it's recommended over port 853. Um, so, what can you learn from DNS? A whole lot can be learned from DNS. And if I were a threat actor, this is something I would use immediately, um, because you can hide what you are doing. And in this case, decryption may be able to see it. Precryption will definitely be able to see it. Um, so, what can we see from DNS inspection? I was tinkering around in my lab, and here's what I noticed. So, I had some outbound DNS on port 48,000. Weird. And I looked, and it's also it looks like this is malware, right? Cisco-update.com. Well, that's weird. And it's outbound on port 48,000. Um, this would be detected two ways. One is I would see TLS on port 48,000. Super weird. The second is we would also detect the DNS lookup and what the contents were. So here I did a quick search for Russian DNS queries. There's several things that are interesting on this. It's on a standard port, so good. But the time to live is 5. So either it's a high availability site, because the TTL is 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, please re-request DNS. And what this can be is a precursor to a fast flux DNS attack. So every 5 seconds, please ask. And this allows an attacker to hop IP addresses quickly with the same domain name. The other thing we can capture is the domain that was replied to. In this case, it's a .ru. I mean, we want to know .ru's for reasons, which we won't get into here. But this is something that can be captured from DNS over TLS. DNS errors. So this is super interesting because if you look at the non-existent domain error, I've got 3,800 non-existent domain errors. If that's increasing at any kind of pattern, that's an indication of an indicator of compromise, because we have a compromised host attempting to phone home, probably to a DGA, right? Domain generated algorithm. And it's waiting for the command and control to come online so it can start getting commands and start doing things. Now, with the DNS over TLS, we can also capture what domains it's phoning home to get idea of what's going on. Also, any kind of errors, if we see errors here, you're having performance problems or network problems or security problems at some point, this is always good to see. Rogue servers. Some threat actors will set up or they will communicate via DNS internally, and it will appear to be a rogue server, or someone just set up their own DNS and it truly is a rogue server. And these are things not sanctioned by IT. Now, these could be home routers people brought in, someone brought in their Linksys at their desk or something else, but this should be investigated as well. So another zero trust use case I want to talk about is the Cisco firmware router compromise and replacement. So Talos Labs published an active zero day against Cisco routers October 16th. Vuln check as of October 17th was up to 10,000 compromised routers. I think it's 40, 50,000 last time I looked. And if you look, there's similar but different attacks, in which case if you check the link there for CISA, where threat actors have been seen replacing the firmware of routers. And this is super interesting. So they've compiled their own, and either there's a bootloader shim or they've replaced the iOS altogether. And while it's still early days and this is still being investigated, what was noticed was that some of the compromised control traffic wasn't being logged. Again, we have a single source of truth. So we're back to a problem where the routers have always been a single source of truth for network logging, but well, now they're not. So conceptually, we need to get into our mind, and this is part of the familiarity bias that we all have, including myself. It's that if there's any single source of telemetry on the network, it by itself can't be trusted. You need some kind of backup or telemetry in parallel to verify. And in this case, if I had logging For example, if Gigamon was doing the network logging and then I also had the routers doing the logging, we could potentially run a diff on what was being reported. And if I see some SSH connections that are in one log and not in the other, well, now we have a problem. Some of the other things going on is admin users are being created on these routers, which gives them full control access, and they could easily pivot into other areas of the network. And having been a former network admin, that's kind of scary, honestly. And I'm afraid to see where this is going to go, but this could get real weird. So, in closing, when it comes to zero trust, have a plan. Don't just put zero trust on a project and go and assume you're going to be further down the line. Much like a cloud migration, make sure you have a plan, at least a first step. And this is going to be an iterative process. Understand where a solution fits into the plan. Whoever that vendor may be, whatever they do, solve for the unsolvable, encryption, right? And lead with curiosity. We all have our confirmation biases. We all think we know what's best and what's not. And in some areas, in our particular areas of expertise, we're probably correct. But in other areas, we should lean on a team that has knowledge that is outside of our own. And there's no single source of truth in zero trust. And that means we need to take a step back and look at, oh, maybe the routers is not enough. Maybe the network logging is not enough. Maybe I need an additional source of telemetry. Maybe I need the EDR to verify what the network is seeing, and vice versa. So, do we have anything on the Q&A?
Yeah, we do. A lot of questions in here, and thanks. Really interesting presentation so far. The first question here: identity wasn't mentioned. Isn't that important to zero trust?
Identity is extremely important to zero trust. I didn't cover it because I felt it would be too much, right? I mean, you absolutely need identity. If you don't know where to start tactically, you should inventory all of your user accounts, all of your machine accounts. Absolutely start with identity. Yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Next one, they're asking if all my enterprise data is on managed devices and I run EDR on managed devices, isn't this the most logical architecture?
But they're not, right? What about your routers? They're not running EDR. What about your print servers or your printers or those copiers in the corner, right? There's a lot of threat actors that like to live in those. EDR is absolutely necessary on your endpoints, but you have a lot of IoT. And if you start looking on the network and you start seeing what's chattering, I promise you, there's a lot of machine to machine communication, IoT to IoT communication that you may not be aware of that you cannot put an EDR agent on that has your data on it.
Okay, excellent. Uh, Next question here, they're wondering what about supply chain attacks and zero trust?
Well, I mean, the Cisco router exploit is kind of a supply chain attack, right? Something we trusted now is vulnerable. This is going to be a growing concern, off the shelf software, off the shelf hardware that supplies many of these things. You could buy, a fish tank thermometer and it has a compromised Linux kernel on it. And yeah, that's huge. This is why we need the continuous verification, the continuous visibility into the network communications to see if something is phoning home or behaving in a way that it shouldn't.
Okay, all right. Um, Beware of those fish tank thermometers.
Right.
So this next one is an architectural question. Should I do ZTA in separate environments or as a single enterprise ZTA zone?
My first thought on that, as a network nerd, is if you've ever migrated routing protocols or from one network to another, one way you do it is you build one network on top of or below the other, and then you switch services or devices over one at a time to the other network. So I would probably look at building conceptually like a ZTA network. And then I would find the easiest applications and services to start migrating over, and then having my safe zones, so to speak, which kind of gives you a way to at a glance know when something's been migrated over, because you're going to end up with a remainder of really difficult, gnarly IoT stuff that's hard to move. And this is a good way to take a bite-sized approach to zero trust migration. So that would be a good idea.
Okay. All right. So you talked about Gigamon's new precryption technology. There's a question here about that. They're wondering, how does precryption fit into compliance?
So it's super early days. That's a very valid question, and we're still working through that ourselves, right? Because the traffic is being mirrored out or duplicated, and you have uh, oh gosh, I can't remember the word, but ownership concerns of the data. Now, remember, it's not live data; it's just copied data, so you can't really change it in flight. But that's a valid concern, and that still needs to be investigated.
Okay. Um, Wondering, are there any cloud native solutions for decryption?
Kind of, sort of, not really. Uh, we still have like the break and inspect methodology, right, or potentially the proxy forward. And this is kind of one of these where I'm going to go with the familiarity bias, where it's always been done this way on prem, so obviously it has to work that way in the cloud. There's no broad lateral decrypt solution that I'm aware of. So this would be, in my opinion, the first.
Okay. All right. Um, and maybe one more question here. You talked a bit about the performance cost of precryption, and they're looking for maybe some more specifics about that.
It depends on where it's installed and what it's installed on. Now, if you look at traditional decryption, you've got a big stack of specialized processors that are running that, and they're still pretty slow. This should be a much faster solution, but there's going to be a performance hit. I'm don't hold me to this, but I'd say maybe 10% initially. We'll have to see how that works at scale, but you should budget that in. Now, conversely, if you look at the traditional ways of decryption, that just doesn't really work in the cloud at all, right? So it's first of its kind, but yeah, there's going to be a hit.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, I think that's about all the questions there. Stephen, great talk here on zero trust and encrypted world. Really appreciate your time today.
All right, thank you, Scott.
All right, and we do have a poll here for you. It's the what additional information would you like about the Gigamon solution? You can see all the options there. They run from data sheet, technical white paper, customer case study, pricing details, personal demo. I'd like to try it for myself. Already a customer. You can click as many of those as you like. And while you're filling out that poll, I would like to remind you that if you are eager for resources from Gigamon, there are some right in your console that you can download right now. Again, first off, we've got that white paper on zero trust and the importance of network visibility written by John Kindervag, the creator of Zero Trust. There's an analyst report also by John Kindervag about how deep observability is the foundation of zero trust. Then there are 3 PDFs in there. One's about Gigamon's implementation of the Department of Defense. Another is a case study involving both the DoD and intelligence agencies. And then there's another PDF about network visibility. So check all those out if you haven't already. You've still got it like a minute to download those. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the poll up while we take care of our last piece of business today, which is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. So we're giving away a $250 Amazon gift card today, and the winner is Stephanie Shaw from Georgia. Congratulations to Stephanie Shaw. We'll be in touch to get you your card. Okay, well, thanks to everybody who filled out that poll. I'm going to go ahead and close that down. And that's going to conclude today's event. So thank you for attending. Thank you for all your great questions, and have a fantastic rest of your day.